Hi guys, I'm back with another video on my floor, just like my last 4 videos have consisted of, but today I wanted to do a January reading wrap-up. Even though it's February 8th, I feel like I haven't filmed in a minute, and I never really talked about majority of these books that I read in January. January was a very good reading month for me. I ended up getting through 9 books, which I think might be the most I've ever read in a month. So let's just jump into it. Okay, the first book I read in January, I started this December 20th and I finished it on January 1st, and that is The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. I ended up giving this book a 3.5 stars. It's about a man who, he works in an amusement park and he's a retired war veteran, and one day this roller coaster breaks and it falls down. He jumps in front of it to save a little girl's life. We don't know if he actually saved that girl's life until the end of the book, but he jumped in front of it to save this girl's life, and then he ended up dying because of it. And when he gets to heaven, he meets these 5 different people. Now, some of them he's never even interacted with, and some of them were very present in his life on Earth, and he got to see how his presence impacted everyone in his life or around him, even though some people he never met. The premise of this book sounded so good, and it's honestly pretty short, so I thought it would be something that I loved, but I found the pacing to be very slow, and I found that the actual ideas and concepts in this book were very already known, if that makes sense. Obviously you impact everyone who you surround yourself with, and when you die, people are gonna remember you. I really did enjoy the theme of how you can impact strangers who you never even met or knew that you had an impact on. I did like that. However, I just found it to be boring and not very slow, but just kind of lost me at a lot of points. So that's why it only got a 3.5 star from me. Okay, the next book that I read in January was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Now this one I started all the way in November of last year, and I didn't finish it until January 5th. But that's because in November, when I first started it, something happened in my life where I was like, I want to soft DNF this book right now. And then I ended up picking it back up towards the end of December and finishing it. I gave this book a 4.5 stars. I highlighted and tabbed so many parts of this book, and I just think it is such a beautiful story. This is a book all about Sam and Sadie, who they met when they were very young. They met in a hospital, and they became friends, best friends, hit it off, and then miscommunications happened, and they grew apart. One day, Sam sees Sadie in a train station, and they both always played video games together in their childhood. So when he sees her in this train station, he yells her name and asks her to come make a video game with him. Now, so much of this story has stuck out to me, and I still remember almost every detail, even though it's been over a month since I finished this. And I think that that's really beautiful, and that goes to show just how much I enjoyed this book. This basically follows their friendship for 30 years, and I just love literary fictions like that, where it's character focused and follows the 2 main characters for a long amount of time. Growing with Sam and Sadie was one of my favorite things ever, and it just shows how deep love goes even when it's platonic. It also has a huge theme of miscommunication and also missing an opportunity and how that can impact the rest of your life. But only reason it wasn't a 5 star for me was because the pacing is super slow, which I'm somebody who I do not enjoy slow paced books, but somehow the pacing in this book, I was still able to pick it up and enjoy it and appreciate it, even though it was so slow paced. But it's not a 5 star for me because I did kind of dread picking it up at times due to the super slow pacing. Okay, the next book I read, it took me only 4 days. I started it January 5th and finished it January 9th. I don't have it on me anymore though because I checked it out of the library, but that was Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. Now this book I only gave a 2.5 stars. This is a story about a man named Chris McCandless who went into the woods, into the wild, left his entire life behind, got rid of all of his money, his phone, his everything to just go live in Alaska and try to see how long he could survive. And then eventually his plan was to come back home to his family. However, he ended up dying in Alaska and was found by patrol groups and moose in a bus. And so Jon Krakauer was fascinated by this story. He picked up the book and tried to write Chris's story himself. Now, my issue with this book is not the story of Chris. I thoroughly enjoyed the story of Chris McCandless, and I thought that it was a great representation of adolescence and having these dreams and going into your dreams irresponsibly, and also a great representation of the idealization of picking up and leaving everything behind to go be in the woods. I feel like that's what a lot of people, especially in their early 20s, do kind of aspire to complete. And Chris was able to shed a light on how you need to do research prior to going out into the woods. So that part of this book I really, really enjoyed. I really liked reading about Chris. My issue with this book, and the reason that I only gave it a 2.5 stars, is because 80% of the book was about all of the people Chris met on his journey rather than Chris. And then also a lot of the book was about the author himself. So the author kind of took Chris's story and intertwined his own life with it. And it does warn you in the synopsis that he does that, and he explains that this was how he wanted to write it, which I understand. I just didn't enjoy that writing style very much. I actually had to listen to the last 40% on audiobook because I just could not get through the book anymore. I got so sick of reading about everyone but Chris and so sick of hearing about the author himself, and that was an issue for me. Another problem I had with this book was that the timeline is all over the place. The way that Krakauer wrote it, he essentially told the story kind of backwards, and he just told you about everyone who Chris met along the way, and then tells you a little blimp of Chris's life before he went to the woods, and then tells you about how Chris got to the woods, and then tells you his own life story, and then we get back to Chris. And the timeline was very confusing, all over the place. There were a lot of characters thrown in there who were unnecessary to the story, and I just found it to be a hodgepodge of randomness and not actually the story of Chris McCandless. Okay, the next book that I read in January was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I do realize after reading this that this book has a lot of controversy, and Sarah J. Maas got a lot of controversy because she's kind of using this story to hate on the Irish, from my understanding. I'm not very educated on that topic, and I read it before knowing about all of the controversy and issues within this story. So I solely rated the book based on what I thought of the book. This is outside of all the cancellation and controversies and everything because I'm not educated enough on that to speak on it. But the actual reading of this book, I rated a 3 stars. Now, this is a book about Feyre, who goes into the woods to hunt because hunting is how she supported her family. And she kills this wolf, and then a couple days later, a beast comes to her door, and he says, "You killed my friend, who was that wolf, so now you have to come live with me in my fairylands for the rest of your life." And it kind of unwindles. You see that there's some political issues going on within the fairyland, and they have to navigate those issues, and they kind of start to fall in love too. None of that is spoilers. But the reason that I gave this book a 3 star is because there's the second half of this book, Feyre has a lot to go through, and the way that those conflicts were solved seemed so unrealistic to me and predictable. And it's like, woo, the human won again. Like, the good guys win again. But it just felt so unrealistic, which I guess it's a fantasy book, so it's supposed to be kind of fictional and unrealistic, but it just felt super predictable and unrealistic. I enjoyed the actual reading process, and I didn't find any of this book to be super slow, but I just could not enjoy the actual story because of how unrealistic I found every single part of it to be. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot that I read the next book that we're going to talk about, which I guess I didn't read it. I read 50% and then ended up DNFing it because I hated this book so much that I gave it a 1 star. And that is Lonely Girl by Anna Vichon. I also don't have it anymore because I gave it to like one of the free little library trade out house things, if you know what I'm talking about. I gave it to one of those because I just did not want it in my possession. I didn't even trade it in for another book. I just wanted it out of my face, so I put it in one of those. But this is supposed to be a memoir about Anna Vichon traveling from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast, kind of like a Chris McCandless thing, but she kind of had more of a plan, and she wasn't just going into the woods. She was moving her life. However, throughout this book, all she talks about is men. And if you go back and watch my reading vlogs, I get into it more, but I had to rate this book a 1 star because Anna did not talk about her travels hardly at all. And when she was talking about her travels, all she was talking about was negativity and anxiety and men. The entire book was just about men. And I looked it up and I was like, does this get better? Does she grow into herself? And it was essentially like, no, the reason that the book is called Lonely Girl is because she doesn't know how to be by herself, so she spends the entire book relying on men for all of her acceptance and happiness, and it just really, really, really frustrated me to read. So instead of making myself more mad throughout the book, I decided to just DNF it. I think that I spent 2 days on it from January 6th to January 8th, if you were wondering about that. But I would not recommend this book to anyone unless you were strictly reading it for research purposes on anxious attachment and being unhappy with yourself and women being dependent on men. I really wanted to read a book about a strong, independent woman moving her entire life, and instead I read a book about a girl who was depending on men for every single thing. So I did not enjoy that. Next book that I read was Firefly Lane, and this took me from January 18th all the way until January 31st to finish. It is a very thick book though, so that's why. I'll actually show you the book real quick. It's pretty thick. I think that it's like 600 pages. But before I tell you my review, I just want to show y'all how long my review is for this. I don't know if you can see, but all of this is just my review for Firefly Lane. So if you want to go watch my last reading vlog, that is where I read this, and you can watch me explore this entire book in deep detail, but I'm just going to be giving a brief summary here. I gave this book 4 stars. Given my review, you maybe would have assumed that I gave it 5 stars, but I did give it 4 stars. This is a book about Tully and Kate who meet in 8th grade and then spend the next 30 years of their lives being best friends, similar to Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, but not that similar. And they're best friends, and one of them keeps making these really horrible decisions, and you just have to watch the other friend continue to love her throughout her life. And it is a beautiful story of womanhood. The last 40 pages literally had me sobbing the entire time. This book crushed me, and I really, really enjoyed it. However, the pacing was so wonky and off. From about the age of like when they meet, so like 12 years old, all the way until they're like 25, the pacing is super fast, but it's also Kristen Hanna only told you and didn't really show you the girl's emotions. So it's like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And then you get past that, which is only like 30% of the book. And then you're stuck in these women being in their 30s, doing mundane things, living mundane lives for the rest of the story. And I found the second half of this book to be very boring up until the last 40 pages. So for that reason, I can't give this book a 5 stars, but I would give it a 4 stars, and I would recommend it to literally any woman of any age because I think it is a beautiful representation of womanhood and having a best friend and loving that best friend no matter what. The next book that I read in January is Demon Copperhead. This is another one that I finished on the 31st, but I actually started this one on, I'm trying to see here, I think I started it on the 10th. So this one took me like 20 days to get through, and I had to listen to the last half on audiobook because it was very, 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 very slow in the middle. However, I did end up rating this 4 stars. I think that it is a beautiful representation of poverty. The decisions that we make and how our parents shape those choices and friendship and adolescence and how that grows when you get older. I think this explores a lot of really, really beautiful and amazing topics. Demon Copperhead is the story of a boy named Damon who grows up in a trailer park with his mother, who is a drug abuser, and next door to their trailer lives his best friend and their parents. And you have to watch how Damon, which he goes by Demon, so if I call him Demon, I'm sorry, but you have to watch how Damon navigates his life and how he works around the foster care system, how everyone he meets along the foster care system impacts his life, how him and his best friend both grow up and grow apart, but then eventually meet each other again. It was a beautiful story, and so for that reason, I gave it a 4 stars. The reason it's not a 5-star is because this is almost painfully slow. Like, the first half is pretty fast-paced, but once you get around the halfway point, it is slow like syrup, like frozen honey. And I didn't not enjoy that aspect, but I'm just someone who doesn't like slow books, if you haven't already noticed. So yeah, that's the reason that this book only got a 4 stars, but I would recommend this to literally anyone who wanted to explore deep, sad themes of foster care systems and hurt children and how those children grow up and how your childhood impacts you. Like, everything about this book is so beautiful. Just know that the pacing is super duper slow. All that being said, I know that was only 7 books and I said that I read 8, but after double checking, my last book I actually did finish in February, and that was Normal People by Sally Rooney. But since I finished it in February, I'm not going to put my review for it in this video. I will have that review in my next video, which is going to be a reading vlog where I read book talk or popular books. So be on the lookout for that if you want to see me read Normal People and a bunch of other fun popular books right now. But I'm so glad that y'all enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.